My name is Tara Kalk. I am the project coordinator for the Southeast Mental Health Technology Transfer Center School Mental Health Initiative. We are very excited for today's learning session about communicating the value of social emotional learning and talking about evidence and resources to facilitate community conversations. Again, we encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat box and turn on your cameras so we can see each other's faces. If you have questions during this webinar, please enter them in the chat box and we'll have some time at the end of the presentation for question and answer. We also encourage you to use the chat box to share any resources with us and ask questions. A quick disclaimer, the Southeast Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, administrative supplement is funded by Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the presenters and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS, SAMHSA, for the opinions described in this document is intended or should be inferred. All right, I see a lot of familiar faces, but for those of us who are unfamiliar with the Southeast MHTTC, I would like to let you know that we are the School Mental Health Initiative, and we're located in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Emory University Rollins School of Public Health. We serve 8 states in HHS Region 4 that you see pictured here in orange. Our center includes faculty and staff with expertise in public health programs, finance, policy, and health systems. This provides us a unique lens through which we can address mental health priorities in our region. The goal of our center is to accelerate the adoption of evidence-based mental health programs and practices by providing training and technical assistance to Region 4. I just want to give you a quick upcoming note. So at the conclusion of this webinar, there will be a link to an evaluation that will come up in the chat box. So please take a few minutes to provide us with your thoughts. This is really important for our funding, and we really appreciate your feedback. And now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Elizabeth Connors. She is an assistant professor at Yale University and a faculty member with the University of Maryland National Center for School Mental Health. Dr. Connors received her PhD in clinical child and community psychology, and her work focuses on improving access to high-quality mental health promotion, prevention, and intervention services and supports for underserved youth and their families in critical access points, such as schools and community settings. And I'll hand it over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Tara. I really appreciate it. From time to time on these webinars, I also like to just add to my bio that I'm originally from the Southeast. I grew up on the Florida Panhandle. And so as always, I'm just really honored to be here with you all today and supporting the Southeast and the important work that you're doing out there in schools. I know we have a number of folks joining us from outside of the Southeast as well, from all over the country. And so wherever you are calling in from, we welcome you here. We did develop this webinar because we know that social emotional learning has become a bit of a hot button issue, to say the least, in some school communities. This is happening throughout the Southeast, but also nationwide. And so, you may just be answering some curious questions or providing some clarifications, or you may be in more heated conversations right now that are happening at your school board level, maybe in your PTO meetings. So I think people may be coming to this call with a wide array of different reasons that you're here, but probably this has become a question and a point of clarification that's important for you locally. And so our goal is really to provide some resources, some evidence-based resources and places you can go to, including some talking points for schools and families to have really factual and transparent conversations about what SEL is and why it has an important place in schools for child development and academic success. So we welcome your conversation, your questions throughout this. Please type in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and hopefully we'll have some time for sharing and discussion. But we are here to support you in this and all other matters that pertain to student mental health and well-being. The learning objectives for today are really to increase understanding of how to communicate about, as I said, what SEL programs are and evidence supporting their contribution to academic success. We want to just make sure everyone is super familiar with the most reputable free resources out there to assess the evidence and application of social emotional learning programs for your local school community. And as always, we want to promote cross-state networking and shared learning about communicating the value of social emotional learning in schools. And on that note, I want to say that, we see the chat as a place that you all can also talk with one another. So you're welcome to pose questions in the chat that may be a question for me or our Southeast MHTTC team to weigh in on, but we encourage you also to use the chat to pose questions to one another as you're kind of problem solving and doing some shared learning around this topic. So here's where we're going with our slides today. And as I said, I'm really hoping that we can have some conversation. I'm just going to go over some of the basics here in terms of what is social emotional learning, so we can all get really centered on that, and also just sort of recenter on how we can talk about what SEL is to others. And then we're going to talk about how do you assess what is inside these social emotional learning programs? What are the components that they offer? What is the unique evidence supporting the ones that either are being implemented in schools or being considered for implementation? We are going to talk a little bit about addressing concerns and specifically just really around kind of finding common ground and having some of those conversations that could be tricky conversations, but using best practices and parent and family engagement, just like we always do for strong school, family, community partnerships. And, we always have a lot of resources at the end. So this this webinar is obviously being recorded. You can access it afterwards. You can share it with colleagues. So I tend to go through those resources super quick at the top of the hour, but just know they are there for you if you want to look into them more. Okay, so, at the most basic level, social emotional learning is really an updated form of life skills. There are different social emotional learning frameworks out there. The CASEL framework that's shown here is the most popular. So you may be already familiar with this one. This framework shows us what SEL is and what are the different components. So as you can see here on the slide, it reminds us that SEL is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to basically understand themselves and the world around them. And there's a lot that is kind of layered in that, right? So how we manage and understand our emotions, how we set and achieve positive goals for ourselves, how we feel and show empathy for others, whether those others are like us or unlike us, how we establish and maintain positive relationships, and how we make responsible decisions. So at the core, these are the competencies or the skills that SEL programs are designed to promote and to support. And importantly, these are core life skills that we all need, whether we're children, teenagers, grown-ups, or older adults, right? So these are just really core life skills to our humanity, really. There's another framework that we have shared. Actually, there's a prior couple of webinars that we've done hosted with the Southeast MHTTC on social emotional learning. My colleague Mike Strambler and I had done some of those, and we really like sharing this other type of framework to think about what social emotional learning skills are by Stephanie Jones and colleagues out of Harvard. They're very well connected to CASEL, and so this is completely in alignment. But one of the reasons I like to share these social emotional learning skills, looking at it this way, is I think the language is really approachable in kind of the buckets that we think about these different skills falling into. So Stephanie Jones and her colleagues talk about brain power, feelings power, people power, citizen power, which is really around character skills, and attitude power, which is mindset. So I encourage you to find the framework and the materials that you feel like are relevant and accessible for the communities in which you are working, so that there can really be a clarity around what are these skills that we are intending to equip students with when they come to school every day. So with these social emotional learning skills in mind, I'm really curious to know what SEL competency you all see being needed, particularly right now. You know, many of you are at the school level, or some of you at the district level are interfacing with schools and with students. And even if you're not in a school setting, you have children probably in your lives, in and around you. What SEL skill do you think is most needed right now? What are you seeing from our young people in America that they need? And please feel free to type that in the chat. I'd love to just get your thoughts. You know, we do this, by the way, we do surveys of teachers before we go in and implement different types of social emotional learning programs. We ask teachers, what are you seeing and hearing on the ground? What are kids needing the most help with right now? And this is an important process, right? Because it's really hard to support and teach and scaffold and rehearse all of these skills all at one time. So sometimes we have to be judicious around what are the skills we really want to double down on when we're looking for SEL curriculums. You know, what do we want to make sure is really in there, because we want to find you know, programs and curriculums that are going to support the skills that students need most. So I'm seeing a lot of things coming in. Thank you all for sharing. I'm seeing brain power. I'm seeing people power coming in here, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, social skills, managing big emotions, feelings and people. I love how Prudence put that, feeling and people. This is great. So these, I think, are important conversations to be having within your school communities and with the surrounding community, because at the end of the day, I think we all want children to have these kinds of skills to help them navigate the world around them, and also to manage themselves and to be successful. And talking about these specific skills that we see our students are needing support with, and need to be able to continue to develop, can be one opportunity for finding some common ground. I also wanted to just make sure that you all have access to the most solid evidence that we tend to stand by as it pertains to social and emotional skills and academic success. The research is quite strong in this area. In 2011, there was a big study pulling together a lot of research, basically from 270,000 K through 12 students that had access to over 200 different kinds of SEL programs. And they found, when compared to students that did not have access to that SEL programming, there were a number of outcomes associated for those young people, including 11% gains in academic achievement that was seen later on in the high school years. So there is quite a strong link that's been established, and some of this work is actually being replicated and updated right now, continuing to show the link between social and emotional learning skill development really being predictive of academic success. And so this is why it makes so much sense to embed this work, particularly in the academic setting. There's also been economic analysis conducted for several SEL programs, finding a benefit to cost ratio of 11:1. That means that the benefits outweigh the costs by 11:1. And then a number of other outcomes that have been associated in, you know, large bodies of literature around not only these enhanced skills for our students, but also pro-social and positive behaviors, fewer conduct problems, lower levels of emotional distress. So a lot of other kind of social, emotional, whole child types of outcomes that you would want to see. I today am going to be highlighting a number of resources from Castle has a really beautiful landing page right now called How Can You Speak Up for SEL? And on that webpage, there are a lot of great resources that I encourage you to use in your community conversations around this topic. This is one that is a really lovely one-pager if it's important for you to make sure that you're communicating the benefits of social emotional learning, and this draws from some of the exact same research that I just presented. So feel free to borrow our slides, our citations, but also this is a nice one-pager that you can download right here. And so, depending on what what the concerns and priorities are in your community, there may be different types of benefits shown here that would speak to, folks that you're working with. So if the concern is about cost, for example, and how much money we're spending on SEL programs, you might want to share the information around the cost benefit research. If the concern is around, why are we spending time doing social emotional learning programming when students should be doing their main academic work, like, mathematics and science and language arts? Well, for that kind of a concern, it would be helpful to share that SEL really does lead to improved academic outcomes and behaviors, right? So when students are able to access the learning environment in a more functional way and, they're able to regulate themselves, they can access that material so much better. So all that to say, listen in here and understand what the concerns are, and that can kind of help you figure out which of these benefits would be most beneficial to share. I also just want to touch ever so briefly on the current context that schools and other child serving systems are dealing with right now, just in their dedication to support children and families. There was a declaration of national emergency in child and adolescent mental health released last October that really detailed how adversity and disruption during COVID-19 is exacerbating what was already a situation occurring prior to COVID around depression and suicide rates that have been soaring for at least a decade for our youth, and disproportionate impacts for youth of color. So in the context of a lot of tremendous stress, loss, community and family burden during the pandemic, it's not surprising that we would see this exponential impact on young people's mental health. I would like to call out that these actually are national pediatric healthcare organizations that banded together to put out this declaration of national emergency. And one of my favorite things about it is that they really highlight how important schools and school mental health is for noticing when students need additional supports, really strengthening the efforts that we have in our schools to integrate mental health programming, and to really begin to understand and advance our effective models of school-based mental health care. So here you have some pediatric health organizations, and a number of their recommendations in this brief report is actually about how we should be investing in schools to tackle and target this child mental health state of emergency. So I just wanted to underscore this with, I guess, sort of the big umbrella point is like, SEL is potentially more important now than ever. I don't know if there's any of you that feel that same sentiment. And there is a lot of recent, also nonpartisan groups, health-oriented groups saying the same. So this is the website that I just mentioned, the How Can You Speak Up for SEL. There are some really accessible fact sheets on here. There's quick videos that talk about what is social emotional learning, what are the core competencies, and really giving people some accessible information that they can hang on to and really understand what SEL is. In my opinion, I don't think that the language on this website is particularly partisan in any given direction. It really appears to me to be quite neutral, quite accessible. And so for those reasons, it's something that, after our team reviewed, we really do highly recommend to you. And I don't know if anybody from CASEL is on, but shout out to this awesome national center that's always bringing us great stuff on this topic. Okay, so a lot of the questions that we have received from the Southeast and outside the Southeast is, how do we go about assessing what's inside these social emotional learning curriculums and programs? What are the components? How do we understand the quality of the things that we're either implementing right now or we're looking to implement? And so this is just a short list really of the types of questions that have been coming in to us as technical assistance leads. People are asking questions like, what SEL competencies does the program actually teach? To what extent is this aligned with our state and local standards, community norms, our school curriculum? Are there criteria we can use to evaluate quality and content? To what extent does it address social justice, gender issues, diversity, equity, or inclusion? And how can we be transparent with families and community members about program content? So I don't know if these are some of the questions that you all are hearing in your local communities, but I encourage you to type in the chat if there are other current questions coming up about SEL programs. We would love to hear them. So please type those in. What other questions are being asked? And while those questions are coming in, I do want to feature this resource where you can go to actually assess SEL program components and evidence. This is one of the best out there. It's CASEL's program guide. It's a very user-friendly site that you could actually share with teachers, parents, community members, where they can even go and look up for themselves what SEL programs you're using or looking to use that you're investing in. It's helpful to see what outcomes are associated with each of the programs. And in addition to this, of course, you would want to go to the program website, right? So that's usually where people go first, is they say, let me go to the website of this program or curriculum, get a sense of what they're all about. But there's sometimes variable types of information that's on there. And so I encourage you to also use this as a clearinghouse as well. I'm actually going to stop my screen share really quick so that I can show you how this works, just in case you haven't been there. So this is the CASEL program guide. And when you scroll down, it takes you through these 3 steps. But what you want to do, if there's a program in mind already that you're curious about, just view the program list. And it will take you, you can sort and filter. So if you're like shopping for a program, so to speak, you can use this like, your Amazon filters on the left and identify sort of what you're looking for. But you also could, you could search or find a program that you're already interested in. So, if we want to look at SS Grin, for example, which I know is a really great social skills program, you can see that there's a lot of information here about sort of where it promotes social emotional learning. There's different settings here. It will tell you about the trainings that are offered and the implementation support that is offered. And then this is my favorite spot down here that I encourage you to look at, is the evidence of effectiveness. So all of you are likely in the situation of trying to understand how any particular evidence-based program, not just SEL programming, fits with sort of the cultural and linguistic competencies, as well as the demographic characteristics and needs and strengths of your local community. So, understanding with whom these programs were studied, were researched, kind of what is their evidence base, who were they implemented with, what kinds of outcomes did they look at, is very important for contextualizing your decision about the potential fit of a program with what you have going on locally. There's a lot of different details that you can find in here that is super accessible. RCT stands for randomized controlled trial. So there might be a couple acronyms in here that you might just need to make sure that your stakeholders are able to access. I really like this piece. And as I said, SS Grin is a great program for social skills. And you can see that here, that the main outcome for this program is improving social behaviors, not to say, and improving other SEL skills and attitudes. Not to say it's not going to impact these other things, but based on the research findings right now, these are the outcomes associated with this program. So again, going back to really asking the question locally, what skills are we looking to improve for our students and what outcomes do we want to target? Understanding the evaluation outcomes of the programs you're looking at is very important. You want to pick something that's going to get you to where you're going, right? And then you can go right to the provider site from here. So I hope that was helpful to take us away from our slides for a minute, but I just find that sometimes I recommend something like the program guide and folks don't always have time to go there. You all have very busy lives. So I wanted to just make sure to show that for a moment. Okay, there are really great questions in the chat. Beth's I'll answer right now just because it's super relevant to the program guide. My understanding is CASEL does only assess universal programs. And I'm not, although I guess in theory, some of these could be used as tier 2 programming, right? Sometimes we know that we can use social emotional learning curriculum as sort of a higher dosage in, for example, pull-out groups or other ways to make sure that some students need like a higher dosage of the SEL skills and competencies. But I don't know why they don't attend to those other tiers, but we could maybe send them a plea and a request because it really is a nice resource that they offer. There are also some questions in here. Lucretia Allen asked if there are funding support sources that professionals can apply for to help support students in schools with SEL. And Amy's saying that in Tennessee, there are SEL positions within the Department of Ed, and you could start a funding source search within your first revenue division. So tell us a little bit more, Lucretia, and we're happy to chat with you and follow up with you, but there's different types of things that you might need to fund to help with SEL. One may be positions, right? So people's positions who are employed at the district or school level, being able to have social emotional learning sort of curriculum selection and implementation support to be part of their position. And there are a number of states and districts that have positions that focus specifically on SEL for all or part of their job. And then the other piece is really, how do we pay for these programs and these curriculums? Because most of them really do come with a cost. And so you're going to have to be sort of purchasing training, purchasing ongoing, implementation support, figuring out how that's going to work in your school calendar. So there's a lot of, resource intensity, to your point, that can come with this. And so mapping out the kinds of resources you need and different funding options. I know a number of schools are applying for Title IV funding right now to support things like social emotional learning. And there's some other, maybe we should do a follow-up webinar on funding for SEL. It's a long answer, but there are funds that you can go after. So thank you for that important question. Awesome. Okay. So let's just talk a minute here about engaging families. And in this, we are going to go back to the core of what we know that is evidence-based in our process of engaging families and other community members in what's happening inside the schoolhouse, because we know that work, really translates to home and the community. So I do want to acknowledge this, some folks call it like this Trojan horse narrative, so to speak, that there may be some pieces inside these social emotional learning curriculum that people are unaware of or may take issue with, that their students are being taught during the school day without them knowing. And so if that particular concern is an issue for you locally, we suggest that you really combat that via transparency. And so transparency is going to help you really communicate to what extent does this curriculum, touch on equity related topics, for example, which ones, how, and at what grade level. And you may also want to explain what SEL looks like, on a daily basis, whether it's start of the day check-in with students or giving some students suggestions on how they can collect themselves when they feel left out or frustrated during the school day, whatever ways make sense for you as a school community to be really transparent about what the social emotional learning curriculum is, what it includes, and what its goals are going to help you. And so there are a couple other points here about transparent communication about SEL programs that I want to touch on briefly. And many of these are the same things that we do when we want to make sure that parents and community members we have transparent communication about all kinds of things that we're doing at school, right? So we always want to use multiple dissemination and communication tools. So I want you to think about your school newsletters, your emails sometimes that go from classroom teachers directly home to parents. I want you to think about snail mail as well as email. Maybe there's opportunities to provide information at your PTO or your school board meetings. But all of us as parents, I'll speak for myself as a parent right now, if you want to get a message in front of me, you're probably going to have to send that at least twice or at least 2 different ways, right? So just being thoughtful about the importance of repetition. I know on the sending end, it might feel like you're kind of repeating yourself about the same key points. But if you know those are the key points that you want to be transparent about, please use multiple dissemination and communication tools to make sure that the message is really getting out throughout the whole community. We do encourage you to also provide facts from the CASEL program guide and share the SEL program website itself. If there's a specific program you're looking at, we encourage you to engage the program developer if that's relevant for you, maybe as a guest speaker, or ask if they have materials that can be shared with families. One of the first things that I go to look for on a program website, because people will sometimes email us and say, we're thinking about doing this one in our local community. What do you think? So I go to the CASEL program guide, check out the evidence, and then I go over to the website. And one of the things I'm always looking for is I want some sort of a curriculum map that's going to tell me, is this a certain number of modules or sessions? What are the topics? What's the content that's really in there? And I'm doing that too to see what kinds of skills are really being focused on within this. So if the kind of information that you want about the social emotional learning program is not on their website, do reach out to them, and ask for them to provide you with the materials you need so that you're not in a position of having to choose a program without being able to really look inside and peek behind the curtain, right? We also encourage you to ask for stakeholder input on materials and messages prior to dissemination. This is just a central gold standard best practice that we should always be doing. So before you send an email blast out or before you put it in your school newsletter, make sure that you've got some parent friends or some teacher friends, or maybe there are folks that work in the school that have been embedded in the community for a long time. Ask them to just lay eyes on that before you send it out and give you some feedback. We all sometimes use terminology that is misunderstood or could inadvertently be interpreted in a way that we don't mean. And so making sure that you're really getting input on your materials and messages prior to dissemination is very important. We're all going really fast, so it takes a lot of intentionality, even if it's a 10-minute, like, can I email this to you and you tell me what you think, but really wanting to be intentional about those materials that are going out, and that whoever your target audience is, you are engaging some stakeholders from that target audience to give you feedback. We talk about this a lot in school mental health screening. This is another time that this comes up, right? So let's say you have a mental health screening that's going out to your community and you want to send a letter home and an email letting parents know that this screening is coming up. Absolutely want parents to lay eyes on that and give you feedback so that what you're communicating is in the way you intend and using approachable, family-friendly language. And of course, please share the research, share the facts on this website. How can you make the case for SEL? There's a great spot called Celebrate the Facts, SEL, celebrate. Get it? Isn't that adorable? They did such a good job with that. So please go there and find that research and share it so that people know that this really is backed by research. So here are a couple other tips that we just wanted to pass by you, just kind of for food for thought. And this is what we do, I think, always with parents and always with students. But as we're going fast, sometimes we forget to do some of these things. So they're really here for reminders. We are encouraging you to seek first to understand the concerns. Hear and understand the concerns of your community. Ask open-ended questions and reflect what you hear. Check to see if you are understanding what they're concerned about. There are a lot of buzzwords, I think, flying around always in education and in mental health, and then also in politics, right? So if somebody has a concern, for example, about a social emotional learning program focusing on equity, or they're asking if this SEL program is really about critical race theory, I would encourage you to ask more questions and seek to understand their concerns. What do they mean when they're using those words? And what do they know about SEL, or what are they curious about SEL and why they're putting those things together? So before we kind of charge in armed with all of our facts and armed with all of our data, which I know is hard for all of us to restrain ourselves from, let's please seek first to understand what the concerns are so that we can find that common ground. And in that is really listening for language about priorities. What are the priorities of of the parents and the community for our children that are growing up in our community. And as you listen for language used about priorities, that can really help you develop a shared language around what skills we all want to see prioritized for our young people. So for example, you may hear priorities around being a good citizen, or having good character skills, having integrity, being a good friend. You may hear prioritize skill development around self-esteem. I want my student to be proud of who they are and to feel like they belong. I want them to understand respect. I want them to be respected, and I want them to respect others. And also priorities come up often around academic engagement and success, and really wanting to make sure that we are holding a high standard to the quality and caliber of education that's being provided for all children. And so as we're listening for language around priorities, that can really help us develop a shared language to then communicate how social emotional learning programs and skills are, in some cases, exactly these, and in other cases, promoting these. So here's a little thought experiment. I'm going to ask you to type in the chat. So think about one skill you want all students to possess by the time they graduate high school to be college and or career ready. What would you like all students to be able to have by the time they graduate high school? What do they need to go out into the big world? Grit. Oh, I love it. Grit wasn't even on my last list, but that's a really important one. Thank you, Lucretia. Coping skills, empathy, understanding, resiliency. Yeah, we want them to be able to have the skills to take on those adversities and stressors that are going to show up for the rest of their life, right? So we want them to be able to be resilient, to deal with uncertainty, to be able to handle stress, to organize themselves and their time, to be aware of themselves, have goals, be kind, have humanity, right? That those empathy skills come in. Good coping skills. Oh, financial literacy. I know that's a really great one. So you may be typing it. If anyone's typing like calculus right now, that's fine. You can put that in the chat. But usually when we ask this question, we don't hear people throwing out a lot of sort of hard academic skills, like writing a good 5-paragraph essay. Those things are all incredibly important and of course central to a high quality education. And at the same time, we recognize that there's a whole host of other skills that our students need to be prepared with to go out into the world after they graduate high school. So I encourage you to think about this, as I titled it, Community Forum Activity, because this is truly something that you could use as an opening, like icebreaker, conversation starter. If you're having community conversations about this, this could be a nice way to introduce what social emotional learning skills are. Let's say you want to, have this, next to the castle wheel coming up on the next slide or something like that. But when people can connect to what these skills are in their own language, it creates a connection to understanding the value of the social emotional learning skills that we're supporting promotion of. Oh, and look, there I have the castle wheels right there. So really linking these things can be one way that is helpful. Good. Boundaries. Yes. And you can see how all of these somehow filter into one of these elements. So let's talk for a moment about addressing concerns. And I don't know that I've covered the universe of addressing concerns, but we wanted to at least provide you with some ideas as you go forward. And we welcome your thoughts in the chat about other ways that you are addressing concerns or would like to address concerns. So the first one comes up around kind of exploring to what extent programs have implicit or explicit language or skill development around issues of culture, race, gender, identity, other sort of intersecting diversities. And the important thing to keep in mind here is that, even though, let's say, traditional social emotional learning programs may not have explicitly included language or skill development around issues of culture, race, or gender, some of the skills will absolutely promote the adoption of empathy and interpersonal skills and other things that you mentioned in the chat that is going to help our students embrace diversity and respect one another's points of view and experience. So, you know, to what extent this shows up explicitly in lessons, for example, in curriculums as, you know, specific teacher prompts, there's probably some variation in that across programs. But even if your social emotional learning program does not have explicit language or skill development around this, you know, these skills are going to equip students to go out into a diverse world in a way that they're going to be able to be empathetic and successful and effective. So it seems to me in some cases, understanding the degree to which these topics are explicit in the programming, in the materials, in the teacher lessons is something that you might want to keep an eye on, because that seems to be raising some particular concerns. However, it is highly likely that if you choose a program that does not explicitly address these issues, these skills will still be very beneficial to students as they cultivate kind of their self as somebody that can operate in a diverse world. The other piece that I'll say about this is that even if there are not curriculums or teacher lessons or prompts specifically asking or giving examples of you know, diversity characteristics, those questions are going to come up in conversation. So hopefully there's some sort of discussion or language that's created in the classroom, in the school environment, that is one of acceptance and inclusion and belongingness, sense of connectedness, and a positive school culture and climate. These are things that should be developed and will end up being discussed probably as part of any social emotional learning program that is implemented holistically. We also recommend that you partner with the community. I talked a moment ago about just seeking first to understand concerns and making decisions together. I've gotten some questions around, like, can we omit certain parts of these curriculums? I would not really recommend omitting content that the community is uncomfortable with on those grounds alone. It's likely to become kind of unwieldy for you. You could end up with pieces of a program that's no longer consistent with its evidence base. So as we do with any other evidence-based program or practice, we want to be cautious with our adaptations, with our omissions, that it's done in partnership with the curriculum developers, and you're maintaining the integrity of how that program was intended to be developed. And of course, you want to make decisions together with family, community, school input and focus on the evidence of the programs under consideration. You want to come back to, you know, the evidence around this program being given holistically. That being said, if there's a certain piece that needs to come out, I'm not here to say don't do it. I just want to raise that is a question that we've received. And then, of course, you know, when you think about best practices in school family partnership, we know that these things are all true. Like, you need to establish effective methods of two-way communication. This should not be a one-way communication from the school out to the community. There should be opportunities for collaborative conversations and relationships around this, so that we can really let families know that their involvement is important. They're an important part of the process, and that we want to hear and empower their perspective. Gathering feedback about kind of family preferences and needs to inform a localized strategy is going to be helpful for you. That said, the school professionals are that. You are trained professionals. You know a lot about education, and I know we have mental health folks on here as well. And many of you have spent your careers in the intersection of education and mental health and bring a great deal of professional expertise to the table. So please, you know, go forth with that professional expertise and you know, bring to the conversation what you know and what you can stand by in terms of the facts and your experience, while still establishing two-way communication. And regularly gathering input is very helpful, so that you are at least abreast of what the concerns are, and you know, on the receiving end, really in the community, what they're looking for. So here are a few talking points. I welcome others in the chat. So those of you that are having these conversations now, what are some of your talking points that are resonating in your local communities that you feel like are sticking with people? And I think this is where our shared learning is important on these calls. Some that we've heard and that we also support are that social emotional skills are the foundation for academic success. We are most often leading with that point. It's completely evidence-based, and it's really the foundation for the importance of this work. Having a program in place ensures consistency. So think about this. Without an SEL program, educators may be placed in the position of locating or creating their own activities or lessons to build student skills. You know, students are in the ecology of our world, and they come in with current events on their hearts and minds, and they're experiencing things all the time in their family and in their community that they're bringing into school. And so when you have an SEL program in place, you're providing consistency and you're providing a curriculum to back up your educators and provide them with some supports in addressing SEL-oriented topics. So I know in some communities there is concern about, you know, particular lessons or whatever that teachers are doing. And so reminding folks that having a SEL program in place really helps us ensure consistency in our curriculum and supports our teachers in an evidence-based way of addressing these issues. Students have always learned SEL skills at school, but maybe was called something else and not with the standard curriculum. We all developed whatever social emotional learning skills we have now, mainly during our K-12 experience. Whether or not we had access to an SEL program may be a matter of age, and I won't tell you mine, but I don't know that I had like an SEL program per se happening in my Title I elementary school in Northwest Florida, but man, did I learn a lot of awesome skills and I felt connected, and this work was happening there. So I think reminding our communities that these skills have always been learned and developed and supported in schools for a long time may not have been called this. And then here's the last one pager that I just really want to make sure that you are aware of from CASEL on their page about key messages to communicate. And this is kind of in line with the things we were mentioning. So I saw that Dominic put in the chat that a good talking point for them has been that it helps decrease disruptions in the classroom, behavioral issues, and referrals are a great buy-in. Yes, very important. So if it's obvious to your school community that there's a lot of disruptive behaviors going on and students are not able to manage their emotions or behaviors, and you're getting a lot of referrals to mental health, 100%. That is a very important talking point, and the social emotional learning program will help you with that. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Dominic. Other talking points you have, please keep them coming. Here's my resource parade. You all knew it was coming, so you can refer back to these. I'm not going to go over them in great detail, but these are some of the top ones that we just want to make sure that you have in your back pocket. This is a nice op-ed about social emotional learning in the crossfire. If this still feels like a new debate that you're trying to wrap your head around, or if this is more like recently kind of coming to your attention, I think this this op-ed does a nice job really describing in a pretty nonpartisan way what's going on and what the concerns are. There are some nice quotes in here too that you may want to pull, like learning is inherently social and emotional, and social emotional skills can help students solve all kinds of problems. Whether they involve equal signs or whether it's everyday life is measurably unequal. So I just encourage you to check this one out. I think it's a nice one. There's tons in the media right now, obviously, about this topic, but this one we wanted to feature. This is a resource from the National Equity Project on equity messaging guidance for districts, affirming your commitment to create equitable, just, and thriving schools for everyone. So this is one for you to think about. If you really are committed to making sure that equity messaging is absolutely central, then this would be a go-to resource for you. This toolkit talks about communicating about racial equity in a charged environment. So one of the things I like on here, I think it's page 7, there's some specific language strategies that you can check out. And I just have kind of the table of contents here so you can see And it really has some nice language that you can use and pull about, you know, how to have some of these conversations in very accessible ways. This is from NASP, the National Association of School Psychologists. They have a lovely brief here about the importance of addressing equity, diversity, and inclusion in schools. And so if, you know, your school psychology workforce, for example, is a big part of, you know, who is involved in kind of these SEL conversations and communicating it to your communities, this could be a nice resource for them. And in general, you know, NASP just always has wonderful accessible resources. There is downloadable, sort of printable briefs and information that is very accessible to families. And I told you about this site already, so please check it out. I believe we have a couple of minutes now for additional Q&A before we ask for your evaluation. So I'd love to pause here. I'm going to check out and see what's in the chat. And I welcome questions and comments. You can unmute and share aloud or type in the chat, whatever you prefer. And please feel free to come on video. I love seeing faces. You do not have to be presenting or a member of our team to be on video. It's wonderful to see you all. Are there other strategies or talking points that you all are looking to or looking for right now in these conversations that we didn't touch on? Also, we love more resources. So if there's been a good resource that's been your go-to, please share it with us and we will disseminate that. You know, I will say is thanks for the accolades in the chat. We always appreciate when things are informative. So thank you so much. And if, you know, we can actually, as I'm talking here for a couple minutes, we can go to the evaluation because people may need to sign off soon. But one thing I will mention about the resources shared is, you know, our team internally, you know, really reviewed carefully the resources that were shared on today's webinar, as we always do. And I just want to mention that we encourage you to do the same to understand which resources land in the right place for your local community. There are, you know, some words, for example, equity, that just don't sit right in some communities right now for different reasons. And so, you know, I think that we are learning more and more about that every day. And it's important. That's why we want to seek first to understand and what that is about for people and what their concerns are. But just know that there may be some resources we included today that have, maybe there's some hot button terms in there. And so we encourage you to vet those resources locally as you're thinking through this. For example, I had mentioned about equity messaging. You know, there's some districts and states who are really leading with that and saying, you know, this is our approach, that we are promoting equitable, inclusive environments in our school communities, and we're not budging on that. And social emotional learning is part of how we do that. There are other communities in which I know you must be much more careful because something is seemingly potentially simple and evidence-based and inclusive of that could rub people the wrong way. So I just, you know, I'm mindful that there are different languages that need to kind of take place in different local communities in order to find the common ground, and reminding us that at the end of all of this, it's for the children, right? Like, we need to find pathways forward to equip our students to be the successful, whole children that they are, and adults in the future. And so coming back to how do we find common ground so that we can have community and family support for supporting the skills that we know students need. So really coming back to those skills, and that the skill development is part of it. Okay, so Lucretia put in teachers pay teachers. schools can ask their administrators for funding from their school budget. Wonderful. Yeah, Teachers Pay Teachers is a really great site with a lot of good materials on there. Anna had said that they've been pretty lucky in her district. They had buy-in from the top to have caring school community in all K-8 and 7 mindsets in 9-12, and they use Panorama 2 times a year for the data. I love it, Anna. That sounds absolutely fantastic. And it's great that you've had that leadership support and that leadership buy-in. You've been able to integrate different kinds of programs depending on the age and grade of the students. It's really important. Wow, 146,000 students in 181 schools. I love hearing that. Look at that awesome reach that you are having for your students and your school community. Hats off to you. That is amazing. And we know we all need SEL right now, right? Whether we're children or adults. So rhythm. Okay, Laura put in rhythm. She likes that. It's help with early intervention. Absolutely. If you've got programs that you like, that you're using, please type that in the chat, because I know often people will come to these webinars to crowdsource ideas for different programs that people are using and liking. It's very, very helpful to kind of talk to one another about what you're seeing. And I'm always seeing names of SEL programs and curriculums that I haven't heard of before. It just seems like they're proliferating every day. There's a cool podcast in the chat, which I don't know that I've listened to it. Probably not, but I should listen to it after this. So thank you, Melissa. I was just thinking about the funding question that we received earlier. One of the strategies that we've seen actually happening in the Southeast, Mississippi had done this, was they were using their resources judiciously to support social emotional learning in a few school districts as a pilot. To really understand, and this was, prior to the pandemic, in fact, and it was kind of in a way, a funding strategy, because they were not able or ready to kind of promote and support SEL fully in all districts throughout their state. I don't know if we have any of our Mississippi state leads on here, but to summarize, they were able to focus on a small number of districts who applied to be part of it, to really pilot that. And so thinking about, if you do have limited resources, whether it's funding for staffing or a certain number of districts you can support, we always encourage small scale pilot and scale up. It's a really nice way to build some sustainability over time for any new practice that you're doing. And so if you're dealing with scarce resources, and often we are always in the Southeast in particular, thinking about how you can start things on a smaller scale and scale it up can be helpful with funding. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and wrap us up for today. We really appreciate everyone coming on and everything you've shared. I'll hand it over to Tara. I know she has some housekeeping items to share with you before we send you off to the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth, for this very informative session. I wanted to remind you all that as part of receiving SAMHSA funding, we are required to submit data related to the quality of this event. And we ask that you please take a moment to complete this brief survey about today's session. It is in the chat box right now, so you can click on that link. And after you complete the survey, you'll be redirected to a second survey that includes additional information our center collects to continue to improve the quality of our trainings and then make sure we're addressing the needs of our stakeholders through our programming. We would greatly appreciate it if you completed the second survey as well. And if you complete the second survey, you'll be redirected to a certificate of attendance like the one you see on the screen. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and hope to see you in our upcoming webinars. Go ahead and follow us on Twitter and Facebook and join our newsletter if you haven't done that already.
And Terry, there are a couple questions